When we think of hot springs, we typically imagine warm, maybe even comfortably hot water, like a nice bath after a long day. But that is not the case for these superheated springs in Yellowstone National Park, which are so hot that if you were to fall in, your body would be cooked instantly. What's going on here? How do these geysers reach such high temperatures? And what happens to the people who fall into them? Let's find out. As a kid, I used to love watching the Old Faithful geyser erupt when I visited Yellowstone National Park with my parents. It was fascinating to see all that hot water shoot up into the air. In fact, it still is fascinating. But now I also have some concerns about falling into it. If you don't know, Old Faithful is one of the most famous geysers in the world and is located in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming. It erupts every 90 minutes, shooting water up to 185 feet, or 56 meters, into the air. So you might wonder why I'm concerned about falling into it, since there is no way anyone could accidentally fall in. Well, hold on, because Old Faithful is not the hottest spring in Yellowstone National Park. There are other ones that can reach up to 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough to cause severe burns in less than a second. That's how hot these geysers get. The first thing you need to understand is that these super hot springs are not connected to the surface of the Earth where we live. Instead, they are connected to giant reservoirs of water located deep beneath the Earth's crust. This water is heated by the Earth's core, which is unbelievably hot. I mean, the center of the Earth is estimated to be between 9,000 and 13,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or 5,000 and 7,000 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt rock and metal. So how does this heat get from the Earth's core to the surface without melting the entire planet? Well, it turns out that the Earth's core is mostly made up of iron and nickel, which are metals with very high melting points. So despite being unimaginably hot, the Earth's core doesn't melt. However, this doesn't mean that the temperature is uniform throughout the Earth. As you go deeper and deeper into the Earth, the temperature increases dramatically until you reach the Earth's core. On average, the temperature increases by 3 degrees Celsius for every 100 meters you descend into the Earth. Now that's a lot of heat. This heat is conducted through the Earth by two main mechanisms. The first is by radiation. This is how heat is transferred through empty space, like from the sun to the Earth. The second mechanism is by conduction. This is how heat is transferred through matter by direct contact. Since the Earth is mostly made up of solid rock, conduction is the main way that heat is transferred from the core to the surface. Now, you might be wondering why, if the Earth's core is so hot, why doesn't the surface just melt? Well, it turns out that the Earth's crust is mostly made up of granite, which has a very low thermal conductivity. This means that heat cannot pass through it very easily. To make things worse, the Earth's crust is also very thick. In some places, it is over 100 kilometers thick. This means that the heat from the Earth's core has to travel a very long distance before it reaches the surface. And by the time it gets there, it has lost a significant amount of energy. However, in some places, the Earth's crust is much thinner. In Yellowstone National Park, for example, the Earth's crust is only about 5 kilometers thick. This means that the heat from the Earth's core doesn't have to travel as far to reach the surface, and it arrives with much more energy. This is why Yellowstone National Park is full of geysers and hot springs. They are basically places where the heat from the Earth's core is able to reach the surface and heat the water that's there. And that brings us back to those super hot springs. What actually causes them to reach such high temperatures? Well, it turns out that it's all about pressure. When you increase the pressure on a liquid, its boiling point also increases. This is why it's possible for water to reach 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius in these springs. At those temperatures, the water is under tremendous pressure, around 1700 psi or 12 megapascals. That's equivalent to the pressure at the bottom of a 40-story building. But wait a minute, if the water is under so much pressure, shouldn't it be exploding out of the ground? Well, no, because there's another factor that comes into play: viscosity. The higher the viscosity of a liquid, the slower it will flow. And the water in these springs is extremely viscous, thanks to its high temperature. This means that the water doesn't flow very easily, even though it's under tremendous pressure. The high viscosity of the water prevents the water from exploding out of the ground. Instead, it creates these geysers and hot springs that we see today. So what would happen if you fell into one of these super hot springs? Well, unfortunately, you wouldn't last long. You'd be cooked instantly. At 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius, you'd experience second-degree burns in less than a second. And at 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Celsius, you'd be cooked like an egg in less than half a second. Even if you managed to get out of the water, you'd only have a few seconds to live. That's how hot these geysers get. It might seem like these springs would be a great place to swim, but don't be fooled. They are dangerous and deadly, and if you're not careful, you could end up in one of them. These springs are not something to mess around with. Now it might seem like a distant reality, but there are actually quite a few people who have fallen into these hot springs and survived. One of the most famous cases was in 2016, when a tourist fell into the black sand basin in Yellowstone National Park. The water was around 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 93 degrees Celsius, and the woman was in the water for several minutes. She suffered second-degree burns on her legs and feet, but she was able to walk away. However, not everyone is so lucky. In 2000, a man fell into the Norris Geyser Basin and was found dead the next day. The water temperature was around 212 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 degrees Celsius, and he had been in the water for several hours. There are also cases of animals falling into these hot springs and being cooked alive. In 2012, a bison calf fell into a hot spring and was rescued by park rangers. The water temperature was around 190 degrees Fahrenheit or 88 degrees Celsius, and the bison calf had been in the water for about 20 minutes. Luckily, the park rangers were able to pull the bison calf out of the water and it survived, but sometimes the animals don't make it. In 2014, a bald eagle was found dead in a hot spring in Yellowstone National Park. The eagle had apparently fallen into the water and was unable to escape. The water temperature was around 200 degrees Fahrenheit or 93 degrees Celsius, and the eagle had been in the water for several hours. These are just a few of the many cases of people and animals falling into these hot springs and either surviving or dying. It's a reminder that these springs are not to be messed with, and that even a seemingly innocent dip in the water can be deadly. So if you ever visit Yellowstone National Park or any other place with similar hot springs, be sure to stay on the boardwalk and keep a safe distance from the water. It's not worth risking your life to take a selfie. We hope you enjoyed learning about the shocking science behind these super hot springs. If you did, please leave us a like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for watching. See you next time. See you.